Welcome to Inbox Roundup 13. Today we're going to talk about, do landmines really float? The Ukrainian Air Force during the counteroffensive, the return of SPAAGs or self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. What are the round things on a T-72's hull with special guest, the Chieftain? Nuclear weapons from Belarus and the best defense against false information. A couple of things to get started. This is my job now. I resigned from my job as a software engineer to do journalism and YouTube full time. So if you want to support the channel by donating $5 to Substack, or get a t-shirt, hoodie, or stickers from Bunker Branding, or get a cameo greeting for your loved one in your life who likes the channel, I'd really appreciate that. Let's get started. So John asks, do landmines really float? And the answer to that is yeah, some do. Especially plastic mines that are well sealed. This was actually a big problem in Egypt because Egypt has blowing wind and blowing sand, and the landmines will ride on top of the sand and they'll shift. We actually weren't allowed to go certain places, and especially we were not allowed to just drive out in the open desert, especially where there was no tire tracks that we could put our wheels in because we could hit a landmine. And some of these landmines in Egypt were there from World War II to the Sinai campaign to the Six-Day War. Like, Egypt is full of landmines in the Sinai. Regarding Ukraine, I think one of the big problems they're going to have is the dam break in the Kharkova Dam. That released a ton of water, and that's going to sweep up all the landmines that were planted on the Russian and I would assume Ukrainian sides as well, at least anti-tank landmines, and it's going to push those things down the river and possibly out to sea. The Dnieper River might be filled with landmines right now, and some of those landmines might be floating their way out to the Black Sea where they can endanger shipping. We'll know if this is a risk if insurers like Lloyd's of London demand more money to insure ships going into the Black Sea, because Lloyd's will insure anything for a price, but they might require more money up front to insure a ship going to the Black Sea if there is a risk of a ship getting hit with a floating landmine. Drew asks, I understand they are facing stiffer resistance than expected, but why can't they, the Ukrainians, just call in some airstrikes from their F-16s to wipe out Russian lines? Why don't Russians attack the Air Force as well? So a couple of things. The first is that the Ukrainians don't have their F-16s yet. The second is that their major threat right now is landmines. That is their biggest issue. And a jet fighter isn't really going to do much against a landmine, and a jet fighter isn't going to be able to detect that anti-tank guided missile team that's going to create that dilemma for Ukrainian forces when they enter that minefield. So using any kind of aircraft in a close air support role might not be the best use of assets. That being said, what Ukraine is probably doing is using these planes, attacking targets that are 20 kilometers or so behind enemy lines. We're talking about fuel dumps, logistics sites, ammo points, any place that will make Russian logistics more difficult. Why Russia isn't using their planes on the front lines, it's pretty similar. They don't really have to. They're letting the landmines do the work. And if Russia started using close air support planes, one of the biggest problems they're going to run into is enemy manpads or man-portable air defenses. So the juice isn't worth the squeeze in using aircraft in this role. Joseph asks, possible question for a mailbag, given the success of cheap drones and the reported effectiveness of the Gepard in Ukraine, do you think we might see a return to SPAAGs or self-propelled anti-aircraft guns in Western militaries? Seems like something that can shoot down drones cost effectively, maybe take a hit from a Lancet, might be really useful going forward. So SPAAGs like the Gepard, the ZSU 23-4, the VADs, the problem with those guns is that they can only be in one place. A more effective way to counter drones is electronic warfare. Electronic warfare can be anywhere, and if you turn it off, it can be nowhere. So I think a better investment would be in electronic warfare, either vehicle-based electronic warfare that can cover a wide area, or man-portable electronic warfare tools that can counter drones. That would be a lot more efficient than putting money into literally a single-use vehicle that only takes out drones. Luca asks, today I saw a Russian T-72 on the lead spleen in Amsterdam. It was disabled on March 31st, 2022 in the battle for Kyiv and has been touring through Europe to show people the war's still going on and democracy isn't free. Now, I was wondering if you knew what the little round things on the side of the turret are. You can see them on the pictures, but I thought it was to hold ERA, but the points on the front where the ERA look very different. So I'm not sure. What do you think? So look, I gotta be honest with you, I know nothing about tanks, I just shoot missiles at them. So here's the Chieftain to answer your question because he's forgotten more about tanks than I will ever know.
Greetings all! Hey Ryan, thanks for thinking on me. Okay, those bumps you're looking at are mounting points or studs for applique armor. Serment français, it is exactly what it sounds like, applied onto the vehicle. Basically, applique armor is a form of armor which is not a part of the basic structure the vehicle is built. It is added on in order to improve protection, either overall or against various types of threat, depending on the type of armor that you're applying. Applique armor on tanks has been around basically as long as the tank has. One can argue that the anti-grenade mesh on the roof of Mark I is a form of applique armor. You can call it the original cope cage if you wish, but as an aside, I do not share the common derision to the modern roof cages being seen in Ukraine. I suspect they're more effective than people like to think. And that's before you get into slat armor in the West. We even call them cages without the disparaging adjective, probably because they're on our side. But I digress. I do that. Actually, I do that quite a lot. No matter. Anyway, by World War II, you start seeing somewhat more substantial armor being retrofitted. In the late 1930s, there was a sudden increase in the capabilities of anti-tank cannon, rendering the existing tanks unacceptably vulnerable. Instead of replacing those tanks with tougher ones, which takes time and money, it is far easier to simply add additional armor. Examples include the T-28 or KV-1 economy, or screened, which was bolted onto existing armor. You basically drill holes and put bolts in, or it could be welded on, such as you might find on the Panzer IV with Zusatzpanzer, or M4 medium tanks, which had the applique armor covering the gunner's cheek of the turret, or the sponsons. This sort of thing would continue post-war, with examples such as the Leopard 1A1A5, Leopard C2, Centurion Mark VI, or Chieftain Stillbrew. Those are the official modifications. Unofficial applique armor modifications included sandbag rails, track links, wooden plags, whatever was to hand. In any case, these were retroactive measures. The tank had already been built and then found wanting later in their lives. The next step in the evolution was to consider the idea of adding additional armor from the beginning. And again, this comes in multiple formats. One was the idea of future expansion. So the earliest example I can think of this is the M10 gun motor carriage. The vehicle was designed to be light, but there was concern that it might prove too light. Thus, they were all built with mounting studs for armor plate, it was about 3/4 of an inch thick, which was also made available for the units to use if they wished to do so. In the end, photographs of M10s with the additional armor are quite rare. It seems that for the job that M10 performed, crews were not willing to add the additional weight. Now, this idea continued over time and in effect became modular armor. An excellent example of this is the M8 armored gun system of the 1990s, which allowed more armor to be added to the vehicle depending on overall requirements, varying from being chucked out of airplanes, which can't be done in a heavy armor configuration, to, oh crap, we're going to play speed bump in Saudi Arabia. We need to be as well armored as we can get away with until the big tanks show up. Now, we still seem to be doing this. Note all of the mounting points on the forthcoming MPF vehicle. None of these, however, are applicable to the specific studs you showed in your picture. All of the applique armors I've mentioned thus far are passive types. Basically, you're just trying to thicken the base armor. The destroyed T-72 shown, however, were built to mount an entirely different type of armor called explosive reactive armor. Now, this works on an entirely different principle to the steel of the turret, which relies basically on brute strength. When hit by a significant enough projectile, the explosive bricks of explosive reactive armor will detonate, and the explosion then deforms or destabilizes whatever is coming in at the tank sufficiently so that the main armor belt behind it can then protect the vehicle. Being explosive, obviously they need to be easily mountable and dismountable, especially as you might need to replace them when they're used. Plus, it wouldn't hurt to have a couple of inches of standoff or space from the armor as well. It's not a bad thing. The reason that you would intentionally want to use this armor from the beginning, instead of simply making metal armor thicker, is weight. To make a metal or composite armor thick enough to stop most likely rounds will result in an extremely heavy vehicle. Witness the current M1s, and that's with the aid of the latest metallurgical and composite science. To oversimplify the matter, metal armor works better against some forms of incoming round, and explosive armor works better at other forms. Thus, by combining the two, you can get an acceptable level of protection for an acceptable weight. Thus, tanks like the T-72BV come with the ERA mounting studs to mount those explosive bricks. And if the bricks are removed, or blow up, that's what you see left behind in your photo. Right, I hope you found that answer interesting and informative. I think I'll give the camera back to Ryan now. Take care.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your valuable time. The Chieftain's channel really gets into the details about historical and current armored vehicles. You can get to his channel in the description and pinned comments below. Daniel asks, the United States will not use nuclear weapons and aggression as a first strike option. The United States will launch its nukes after we already acknowledge bombs have been flown by country X aiming towards us. However, if Belarus fires nuclear weapons into NATO countries, how do you feel NATO would respond? You can't just nuke Russia for actions that Belarusian commanders did. However, you could very much use the argument that it was Russian nukes and thus a counterattack response would target them. Couple of things to start. You might want to sit down for this one. The US does not have a no first strike policy. Supposedly, Russia actually has a no first strike policy. And as Dr. Strangelovian as this sounds, there are use cases for nuclear weapons, and the United States has never said that we wouldn't attack first. And those use cases would be attacking hardened bunkers, attacking amphibious landing ships, or attacking other targets such as ports and airfields. So that's the truth about America's policy with nuclear weapons. There are use cases to use these things, and America never said that it would only fire them in self-defense. Now, regarding Belarus and nuclear weapons, I don't really see that as a possibility. I believe these weapons are in Belarus. It's sort of like a saber-rattling thing. I don't believe the Belarus military is in control of these weapons. Russia is most likely in control of these weapons. I don't see Belarus firing one because the response from NATO would probably be devastating, to say the least. Finally, Joseph asks, I've recently watched you and other content creator videos on Russian propaganda, and it's fascinating how it can be seen as a type of psychological warfare. It's worrying to me that I know people to this day who believe in the Ukrainian biological weapon lab narrative. So what is the best defense against false information being used as propaganda? And can a PSYOP done against the American people be considered an act of war? And who defends against the false information used as propaganda? Boy, that's a good question. I think the best defense against propaganda is education. Video games are a lot of fun, but they've really hurt the war effort because so many people view playing Call of Duty as a realistic simulation in the decision-making cycle of a soldier or how armies actually conduct battles. When you shoot 5 people, you don't get an airstrike. It doesn't really work like that. Airstrikes are planned, weeks in advance or through many different channels. So how to defend yourself is really it's to learn about as many varied subjects as you possibly can. Think of books as a vaccine against misinformation. Now, they can't be fiction books. You need to read nonfiction books on every single subject possible. I think one of the reasons I do fairly well when it comes to either affirming or discrediting propaganda, it's that I have read books on just about every topic under the sun, from a history of salt to Moshe Dayan's biography. So if you can have that wide breadth of knowledge, you're much better armed to fight misinformation. Can a PSYOP against the American people be considered an act of war? I don't think so. Right now, China's running a PSYOP against the United States. It's called TikTok. The government of China is totally capable of moving America's opinion percentages just enough to get certain policies passed by choosing to show or not to show certain kinds of videos. So if InfoWar is war, then we've been at war with China since 2016. But I'm not a lawyer. That would be a question for a lawyer. So the short answer is probably not. Now, who defends against the false information being used? That's a good question because America has freedom of speech, even though there are limitations to that. Like you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. But the idea of a government truthful internet information approval board would be a gross violation of America's civil rights. So really, debunking propaganda is up to you. From what I understand, the ancient Greeks didn't have lawyers. This is why logic and public speaking were so important in ancient Greece. If you went to court, it was actually your job to defend yourself. So I think as hard as it is to add yet another task to your to-do list, it's actually up to you to have the personal responsibility to know what is truth and what is fiction, and most importantly, not to spread disinformation. I know that's a tall order. That's pretty much all we have for this week. Thank you so much for watching.
Oh, hi, America. It's me, Elon. If you want to be cool like me, go and get a Ryan McBeth t-shirt or hoodie from Bunker Branding. I'm going to get a HIMARS shirt because it fires rockets, and rockets are pretty cool, just like me. Ha ha, you fool. It is me, Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, and I will be the coolest once I get a Patriot shirt because the system is fully automated, just like me. I'm going to get a U.S. Navy Department of the Boat People hoodie because I love their management style. Now, I will be cooler than any of you lads once I get my sweet drone shot.
Yeah, I'm going to get a landmine marker shirt because they blow up just like Windows.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to get.
Oh no, it is Steve Wozniak from Apple.
That's right, you nerds. You think you're the coolest for wearing a shirt? Well, Ryan McBeth does all the work, yeah. So go buy a shirt from Bunker Branding to fund Ryan McBeth to increase your understanding. Oh, yeah!